I define an anarchist society as one where there is no legal possibility for coercive aggression against the person or property of any individual. Excellent quote by Murray Rothbard today. Welcome to Liberty Weekly Podcast. By the way, today I will be interviewing Patrick McFarland. The show notes for today's episode 105 can be found at libertyweekly.net/105. Patrick, what's happening?
Hey, man. Good to be on. Good to be on my show with the new co-host.
Absolutely. So, Patrick, why would you want to become a lawyer in the first place?
Good question. That's a really good question, actually. For me, I had gone to a 4-year Big Ten university. I got an English major, and I was undecided and didn't know what to do. So I was really into creative writing, and I majored in English with a focus in creative writing, and I got a German minor. And contingent upon getting my English degree, I said, well, I'm not going to make any money doing this. I'm going to go to law school because the law profession is in the family, and it just seemed like the best next step. I really care about politics. I really care about the law. So why not? And here I am now. It was an interesting decision.
So a lot of times people will say, when discussing right versus wrong, people will say, well, the law is fill in the blank, whether it's on crime, abortion, drugs, punishment. What do you think is the difference between legality and morality, and which is more important as a lawyer?
Well, it's really interesting how those two interplay with each other. I always frame the law in terms of what would I personally feel justified in using violence to prevent or to direct people, because the law is inherently force. And this is something that people in law school would always get annoyed about when we talked during class, because there are still some vestiges of the Socratic method in law school, but I always tried to frame everything in these terms. The law is force. This is what we learned in Frederick Bastiat's The Law, one thing that he really underscores. I have thought a lot about how morality relates with the law. And I do think that the law and what is moral are two completely different concepts. You can talk about what you would feel justified in using violence to prevent, but at the same time, there are things that I personally believe are immoral that I would not use violence to prevent. Prostitution, and one thing. Personally, my own personal convictions are that I think that prostitution is immoral, or at least a little bit icky, but that's my own feeling. I would not use the law to prevent that. And I think that a lot of people out there would agree with me. Prostitution is just one thing. I mean, drugs, different kinds of vices, maybe gambling. There are a lot of people maybe in my family that would think that gambling is inherently immoral. I have no feeling one way or the other, but I definitely wouldn't make it illegal by using violence to prevent it.
So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is making a lot of noise recently with her claim that monopolies are a really big problem in America, yet she believes government should have a monopoly on, like, printing money, compulsory education, AR-15s, the ability to tax and regulate. What do you think about the government having a monopoly on law and order?
Yeah, great question. It's a disaster. It is awful. And I mean, it could be worse. It could be a lot worse, but the inefficiencies in the system are just so apparent even now. I've been an attorney practicing for about 5 months now, and I certainly do respect a lot of the people that I work with, and I know that a lot of people are trying to do the best that they can, but I'm watching clients and litigants going through this process, and especially on the divorce end in your family law situations, while it can get very dramatic and kind of high school drama-ish, it could be really irritating. But it is really painful to watch these people. The state gets involved in your family, and nowhere is it more apparent than in family law. Whether your girlfriend or wife, maybe you had some kind of yelling altercation, maybe she was shoving her phone in your face, trying to taunt you, and she was verbally berating you, and you grab her cell phone and you throw it across the room. Well, she calls the police and says, this is what happened. The police show up. They arrest you for disorderly conduct. It has a domestic modifier charge in it. And now you're dealing with criminal charges. At the same time, oh, she wants the kids. So she enforces and goes for a restraining order against you. Now you have a criminal charge and a restraining order charge. Well, guess what? Under the federal Lautenberg Amendment, you cannot own any firearms for the pendency of this restraining order. And in fact, if you end up getting convicted of the domestic disorderly charge, or maybe even a domestic battery, you permanently lose your right to bear arms for the rest of your life. This is the Lautenberg Amendment. Google it. We'll put it in the description below. So going back to your original questions, it's really bad just to have the state monopolize this legal system. It is not, I mean, it's very slow. So you can lose your rights very quickly without a lot of due process. The legal standard in these restraining order hearings is reason to believe. So it's a very low burden. Poof, your rights are gone. The state is involved in your family, and it takes a long, long, long time. You could get a hearing in a month. They try and have time limits, but and it's because it's monopoly. This entire system is not, it doesn't heal to any kind of market forces, supply and demand.
So what are some of the most important things you learned while you were in law school?
Well, you learn a lot of esoteric things in law school that are not applicable. Down the road, they become applicable in some situations, but ultimately, what you should be learning in law school is procedure. So you can learn a lot about and I did enjoy law school because you play around with a lot of these esoteric highbrow concepts that we really love as libertarians, and these complex fact patterns and the jurisprudence. You don't learn a whole lot about where law comes from and legal theory. Those things are just kind of brushed over a bit. Or the history of the law. My favorite is the history of the law. But you don't learn essentially what almost 100% of what being a lawyer is, which is, okay, how do I serve someone with the summons and complaint? Some of that you do learn, but what are the local court rules for doing these procedures? How do I talk to my client? Where do I go in the jail to meet my client? How do I call a case? Where do I look to find all these answers? How exactly do I file this motion? Does this judge like a proposed order? Would he like me to submit the proposed order before the hearing? Do I have to draft the order afterwards? So these are all like very practical questions that are not really answered in law school. And you really got to learn them on your own. So I think that law school is not necessary. And Lysander Spooner, going back to him, I did a whole biographical episode on Lysander Spooner that I should put in the show notes too. But he began his legal career by suing, I believe, the state of Massachusetts for entry into the bar exam. And one thing that you kind of learn is that just as in the medical profession, the legal profession has very much solidified itself and ensconced itself through occupational licensure. So I think that one of the reasons why lawyers are so expensive and why a lot of people don't like lawyers is because they have entrenched themselves in this profession through occupational licensure. And law school is a very large part of that. You have to go through law school when I think it would be your best bet just to shadow or clerk in a lawyer's office for 2 or 3 years.
Now, what is the difference between law and legislation?
Okay, so I'm one that believes in the decentralized process of law creation. Now, you have either law on one hand that is the common law. It is bubbles up. I use this analogy a lot in the show. It bubbles up from the people through a string of decisions or through custom or through the way that people have been doing things and settling disputes since time immemorial. On the other hand, you have what is called positive law, which is law by fiat, law by dictates, law because I said so. It comes from it's a top-down process. It comes from a legislature or a king or some kind of dictator, whether it's a group of people or one single dictator. And excuse me, and in this kind of, this is the way that our legal system is right now. And I've realized it even more so. The biggest thing that people tell me is, or one of my mantras is, and I have a post-it note in my office above my monitor, it says, look at the statute first. And it's a really kind of sad thing, because most of the law in modern America is not, of course, it comes from common law concepts, but the procedure and the structure for everything is laid out by dictate, by fiat, in the statutes. So they have, I guess the statutes as they are created in Wisconsin or throughout the United States are codified versions of the common law. A lot of it too, like the Lautenberg Amendment, is a dictate from a legislature, but they just put everything in the statutes, and honestly, that's what gives the authority and governs a lot of the transactions. Everything is codified there. And you really, looking at it and working within the legal profession, you really do kind of realize how our system really is now a positive law system.
What is the purpose of lawyers in a free society?
Oh, that's a good question. So I really don't know. I always bring up Andrew Kern because Andrew Kern is someone that challenges my thought a lot on Facebook. The Principled Libertarian Community, we should put a link into that. I think that Andrew has kind of gone away from believing this. This does relate. Andrew's kind of gone away from saying that libertarianism is about the non-aggression principle, point blank, period. He would quibble with the non-aggression principle, and that's a conversation that we could get into. But ultimately, he says that the goal of a libertarian society ultimately should be competition in the creation of laws. And I would tend to agree with him. So it kind of begs the question of what would a libertarian society look like in terms of law? In terms of arbitration and the system of settling disputes. Who knows? And this kind of is like, well, what is the best way to provide food for everyone? It's like, well, the market doesn't have one single answer for what the best model is for providing food to everyone. In a similar sense, it's very hard to predict what the ideal legal system would look like. So I don't really know what the role of lawyers would be in a libertarian society. I don't know if the role of lawyer would really exist, because if you read, dang it, I can't think of it now, but this book that I've covered in the podcast before, Bruce L. Benson's book, The Enterprise of Law, you learn that the legal sphere is really didn't show up until medieval England, when after the Norman invasion and the Anglo-Saxon kings were kind of going by the wayside, and the kings that did exist in England started to take the criminal law and realize that they could gain money off of monopolizing it. If they made crimes against the person instead crimes against the state, and they started prosecuting crimes on behalf of the state, if the state started prosecuting crimes on behalf of the victim, then they could get a bunch of revenue from that to fight wars or, to run the kingdom. And that's when we kind of see lawyers coming about, is during this time too in medieval England. And what they're really doing is they are creating a barrier between the regular folk, who in a customary legal system, the regular people would be able to participate directly in the legal system, and they didn't necessarily need lawyers. Well, about the time that lawyers start inserting themselves into the legal system is when the law gets much more complicated, much less accessible to the common people. So I think ideally in a libertarian system, there would be no lawyers, or at least there wouldn't be lawyers unless you tackled a very complex system of the law, because, or a very complex aspect of the law, because the way it is now, yes, you can be pro se. If you are pro se and you represent yourself, you're not going to get very far. But we don't need someone that goes to law school or goes to undergrad for 4 years and then law school for 3 years. We don't need them to simply go to a bond hearing, bail someone out. We don't need them to go to the return date. So in Wisconsin, you get your bond hearing, you get served with the summons and complaint, then you have a return date. And so they do the system of pretrials and returns. So you have a conference with the DA, and then you come back to court and report on what you're doing, if there's a deal in the works, or if we're going to take it to trial. 99% of cases settle with a plea hearing, and the criminal pleads out. You don't need someone with a legal degree to facilitate that bargaining process. You need them if you're going to take the case to trial and if you're actually going to challenge these complaints. So it's I'm not sure what the role of a lawyer would be. I see the role of a lawyer being very much minimized, and we can talk about, contracts on the blockchain or dispute resolution on the blockchain. I do agree that I think that's where the legal industry is headed.
All right. So you have been a lawyer for 5 months now. Talk to me about some of the expectations you had and some of the reality that's hit you since you've become a lawyer employed at a firm.
Yeah, I honestly, I didn't really know what I was getting myself into throughout this whole process. I had the expectation, I think, that I would get a lot more hand-holding when it comes to trying to learn what the system is. I thought that I would be spending a lot more time shadowing other people in my firm, or having them kind of tell me what the process is. And I think that my expectations were a little unrealistic in terms of, it's just running from one emergency to the next is kind of what being a lawyer is. You have a client that comes to you and it's one of the worst days of their life. They're dealing with this thing that they don't understand. They're very afraid. They're very anxious about it. They want to talk to someone. And part of the reason, so one takeaway is that there's a reason why they call you a counselor at law. And that's because a big part of your job is to literally counsel people. You're kind of like a therapist in some sense. They come to you with this legal problem and you're counseling them through it. You're giving them advice. You're advocating on their behalf. But a lot of it is just some psychology and sitting down with them and trying to allay their fears, trying to inspire confidence in them, trying to get rid of their anxiety as much as you can. So it is a very people-oriented field that requires a lot of different kind of skills that take time to develop, and you don't really develop them except by going out and doing it. The problem with that is because when you go out and do it, you're not really that good at it because you've never done it before. So there's a lot of pretending, but it's learning by doing and pretending, because that's the only way to do it. And all the lawyers before you have done that. They've done it for years. So on the one side, I was surprised by how people-oriented it is. You got to be a people person. You can be a really smart lawyer all day long, but if your clients hate you and you're abrasive, you're not going to make money. You're not going to be effective. The other side is that it is very common that lawyers will not know exactly what's going on. They give off the air of confidence, that they know everything that's going on, that they're very sure of themselves. But inside, maybe they don't exactly know what the procedure of the hearing is going to be. They know their client, they know their facts. We're going to go in there and react on our feet, and that's just the nature of the game. I would say, though, that as an attorney, as maybe being a doctor, it's very hard to be a generalist because you really have to know what's going on, and you can get your client through the process by being a generalist, by practicing all these different areas of law. But if you are looking for a lawyer, I would look for a lawyer who specializes in a certain area, because every single case is different and there are different challenges with every case. And being a general practitioner it is really hard to give your clients the kind of service that you would like to give them, simply because time is a very, very scarce resource, and you're constantly balancing the quality of the representation with the time that you can give and with the money that your client has put forward. So there's several different factors at play, and of course you always try and maximize the quality of your representation, but it's very challenging, and it's the most challenging thing that I've ever done, but it's really rewarding too. So um, I think I would like to be a specialist because I'm a bit more of a perfectionist.
Yeah. Whenever I do a ton of research in like history or politics or economics, other people who have done no research at all, for some reason, think they are equally as qualified as me to talk and have a valuable opinion on the subject, because there's so many misconceptions in history, law, politics, economics. What are some of the biggest misconceptions about law or being a lawyer?
Oh man. Well, I just kind of covered one of them, is that people presume that lawyers always know what's going on and they're always confident. Um, yeah, to a certain extent that's true, but also it's really scary being a lawyer because you never really know what's going to happen and there's a lot riding on it. And in some level, you have to disassociate yourself from what's going on. Just because if you cared 100% about every case, you would just go nuts and you wouldn't be a very effective counsel. Um, so sadly, I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that there is a presumption of innocence in our legal system, because I'll tell you right now, there is no presumption of innocence. The presumption of innocence that you get is, I guess it's more of a formality, but if you get down to brass tacks, de facto, the way the system is set up, DAs will overcharge for everything, and the onus is on you to prove your freaking innocence. That's the way that it is in this country. And a lot of people just plead out to things that, you know, it's all about risk management, and this is how I explain it to my clients. The whole name of the game is risk management. What can we get from the system? What can we try and protect ourselves from? But that presumption of innocence, it gets you in criminal trials. So you're really dealing. I mean, even if you could contest it, a lot of the times you didn't really do it. Maybe you're not guilty of this offense, but you really got to manage your risk, especially when you're facing long jail time. Um, I guess the other misconception is that the system, people think that that maybe the legal system is made up of these people who are special and they really do know what's going on all the time and they're the experts. When I mean, yeah, I do respect colleagues a lot, and they are very they know what they're doing, but at the same time they make mistakes too, and mistakes are made all the time. And there is a rough kind of general set of rules that we all try and follow, but the reality of the situation is a lot different, and the strict, very by the book procedure kind of falls away towards what's practical a lot of the times. And things are not as cut and dry. Things are even more shades of gray than I ever realized. And if you're a math person that really likes, yes, there's one single answer, then the legal profession is not for you, because it can be very loosey-goosey. Not too loosey-goosey, but you know what I mean. It's not always distinct.
Yeah. Well, with most coercive monopolies, you get terrible results. You get high prices. You get no quality. And with government, we get a lot of terrible laws, legislation, whatever you want to call it. I'm curious, what do you think in America is the worst law?
Well, there's a lot of them, I guess. No, I think the Lautenberg Amendment is a terrible law. Um, it really takes away due process in a lot of different ways. When you get like mandatory minimums and things like the Lautenberg Amendment that automatically kick in. So I'll dive into this quick legal problem, is that you have the Lautenberg Amendment that is a federal law that says that any domestic offense that you commit and are convicted of or plead out to, you get a little tab on your file so that when you go into a gun range or a gun store and someone does a background check on you, you will be flagged, so they won't be able to sell you firearms. Well, this is a federal law, right? And I don't think that there's a very gray, wishy-washy area in between how this federal law relates to Wisconsin, at least Wisconsin state law. So there's tons of case law out there about how, like, which offenses will flag you and make you not eligible to purchase firearms federally. Even if you are convicted of this, the federal government doesn't really enforce it. The ATF doesn't really enforce it that much. You'd be hard pressed to get state officials to enforce it, but you can never buy a gun from any reputable vendor. And so you have, at least in this area, a lot of people that have no idea where they stand. Maybe they've been flagged on this law, but they would never know it. So they're still hunting. They still have their weapons. It's just one big shit show. So there's a lot of really bad laws on the book, but that's one specifically that I've dealt with.
Yeah, you talk about there's no presumption of innocence, and the reason I'm a little optimistic about the future of sort of law and victimless crimes is you have Dinesh D'Souza, one of the big guys on the tough on crime right. Of course, he's not tough on crimes committed by the government, but that's another story. He goes, now, if you think about it, he's giving this as, an example of, he was imprisoned for this jaywalking technicality about political donations. He goes, so in court, they bring in the guy in an orange jumpsuit. He's in chains. A cop is walking him in, and they go, you think he's guilty or innocent? Now, the presumption can't be innocent because most of the jurors, government-educated jurors, are going, oh no, they just randomly put this guy in chains for no reason. Of course he's guilty. So that was so interesting that someone on the right is questioning the criminal justice system. It's like, finally. You also are getting people like Rand Paul in there, Justin Amash, who are saying, legalize drugs. If you watch Ron Paul on the Morton Downey Jr. show, everyone's like, you believe in legalizing marijuana? That's ridiculous. And now most people are against the drug war. So I'm glad you're in the industry, and I'm a little optimistic about the future. I have 3 more questions for you. If you could recommend one book for everyone in the world to read, what would that one book be?
It would probably be The Enterprise of Law by Bruce L. Benson. You really get you get solid statistics. You get this overview of where law comes from. You get this history of the law in the Anglo-Saxon tradition, and you really learn what is good about the law. He's very reputable. I just can't recommend that book enough. It's really great. I know a lot of people have read it in my circles. But just another note on the presumption of innocence, actually. I'm going to go off on just a little bit of a tangent about Lysander Spooner and his advocacy for jury nullification. And there's an episode that I've done on this that we should put in the show notes page. But I've really lost I haven't done any jury trials. I had one that was scheduled, but I faced off against the DA, and I got the charge amended to a ordinance violation, a non-criminal offense. So that was my biggest criminal law win. But I've lost a bit of faith in juries and jury nullification. You can't argue for it in Wisconsin. For jury nullification, you can't argue it to the jury. But I think that, especially in this area, this area is full of law and order people, and it's on the left and the right. It's a blue collar area. I guess you could say kind of in the Rust Belt, kind of a Rust Belty blue collar community here. A lot of people believe in the rule of law, and a lot of people make assumptions about people's guilt and innocence here. And I think that just as much as the jury can be a shield of liberty against the power of the state, I think it is also a spear. And when you get into trials, you really try and play with that too. And the laws of evidence come in, and how we control certain types of evidence and keep it from the jury, because the jury is just as dangerous as it is protective. So I'll put that episode about jury nullification in the show notes. But sorry, I derailed you a little bit. What was your next question?
Who is a person you admire the most?
Does it have to be a famous person or?
No, doesn't have to be famous. It could be personal. Just whoever you admire and why you admire that person.
Well, I would have to say my mom, because my mom, she's the person that inspired me to be a lawyer, and she is a legal professional. And throughout this, I would disagree with her politics, and we've talked about this a lot, but throughout this whole process, I've just become more and more respectful of what she's had to go through in the process of her career, because she has been very successful in her legal career. I would like to emulate that, but I think just the courage and conviction of someone to go through the same process that I've gone through and how hard it's been for me, still going through it, and how scary and intimidating it can be. But at the end of the day, you just have to swallow it and go forward and just keep on keeping on. So I guess her courage to do things like that and step into roles where you don't know what's going on, and the only way to know and get good at it is by charging headlong into the fray. Aside from that, just her methodical, meticulous nature in confronting these legal problems, getting the rule, applying the facts to the rule, and advocating on behalf of your client, and really just narrowing in on the specific issue that's at play in this situation. She's just really good at it. And I think that it's easy to be an armchair quarterback and to do what I've done and to go on and have my podcast and think that I have everything figured out in terms of libertarianism and the non-aggression principle and the law. But to really go out there and live it is one totally different thing. And it's easy to sit on the sidelines and be an armchair quarterback and say, well, you should have done this differently. But to go out and walk the walk it's hard, it's difficult. And my mom has done it, and she wouldn't, I guess, agree with the entirety of, our position where it comes from. But I think that, and moreover, with legal professionals in general, and I've clerked for a judge in here that in this county before, that I really, really do respect. And it's balancing, our ideals and our principles and condemning the state for its monopoly, but also having the respect for people that, although they're doing what we would see as moral wrongs, but still having the respect for the fact that they've walked it and they've grappled with these problems in real life. And I think that it demands respect.
Your mom isn't Ruth Bader Ginsburg, is it?
No.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify. I'm like, it's a small chance of female lawyer. There's not too many. Okay, good. Final question: what is your favorite movie?
Does it have to be a legal movie?
No, it does not.
Well, there's a lot. So I'll say last night we watched The Count of Monte Cristo. With the book is by Dumas, but it has Guy Pearce in it. It has have you seen this movie, Keith?
Yes, I watched it in school. I might have to watch it again to appreciate it, but
sorry. No, it's a great movie. It has Jim Caviezel in it, Guy Pearce, and the first Dumbledore from the Harry Potter movies. He plays the priest in it. Excuse me, I'm burping here I've been drinking great beer. But it's a story of revenge, and it's a classic tale of revenge from Napoleonic France. It's amazing.
I will have to check it out again. I just want to plug 3 books before we end out here. I've been reading this book, Legal Systems Very Different from Ours. It includes Imperial Chinese law, Roman law, the Amish, Jewish law, Islamic law, private law, prisoners law, Somalia law, early Irish law, and feud law. In other words, the idea that law is what government says. There are millions of different ideas on law. Once you grasp there's so many different competing ideas, there's not just what is the law. You can really grasp that, we not only don't need a monopoly on law and order is the worst way to approach something like this. That's a David Friedman book. And then the other 2 are just books by Edward Stringham, Private Governments and Anarchy in the Law. Anarchy in the Law is a collection of essays about law without the state and private governance is real world scenarios today of how private companies use dispute resolution, private arbitration in order to respect individuals and property rights. And of course, you get, governments existing doesn't mean they then have laws and are constantly virtuous. They're the number one freaking cause of war, mass murder, genocide, famine, and economic recession. It's like, we can have law without them. It's all right. Patrick, that's all I have for you. Thank you for being a great interviewee. Do you have any show, any messages to give the audience?
Well, I just wanted to mention one episode that I did, Non-State Justice Systems, a primer. It's one of my favorite episodes that I've done, libertywweekly.net/36. It gets into that excellent new David D. Friedman book, Legal Systems Very Different from Our Own, and we're hoping to do an episode on that coming up in the future. But I'd just like to address the audience, we're doing this now where we do our housekeeping and announcements at the end of the show. We got positive feedback about it. I think it's the best way to do things. So just a shout out to our Amazon affiliate links. We'll be using that for all of the book recommendations that we've been doing. So if you purchase through our Amazon affiliate link at libertywweekly.net/Amazon, we get a cut that we use to buy books for the show and to produce content with. Sign up for our email list at libertywweekly.net/email. I've also been going through some of the show reviews that we've been getting on iTunes, and I haven't checked in quite some time, but we have 22 5-star ratings on iTunes. We also have some recent people who have reviewed the show. Really appreciate it. Very kind words. It really does make this worthwhile. Thank you guys so much. We've been getting really good numbers too, increasing numbers. And it's very humbling, very great to see that. It really encourages us to keep going. So be sure to, through word of mouth or on social media, share the show. It really does help us grow. And the last and final thing is Patreon. We recorded some Patreon bonus content with Stephen Clyde from Sounds Like Liberty, Kyle Anzalone from Foreign Policy Focus, Thijs Vanderlind from the Netherlands. He is also a law student, and he just launched his project, Gaius Libertatis, which I'm going to put in the show notes page. I don't have it brought up on screen, but be sure to check that out in the show notes page. He's a law student. He's going through, he just launched his show. He's kind of taking things from the European side, so I think that's really cool too. But otherwise, support us on Patreon at patreon.com/Liberty Weekly. And that is it, unless you have anything else for us, Keith.
Nothing else, brother. Take care.
All right. Thanks for joining us. Peace.